But as I told you last night, and thank you so much to everyone who turned up at our pub tests for Peter Dutton and for Barnaby Joyce in Tamworth and in Brisbane. And thank you for making those shows the #1 watched shows on Foxtel on both Monday and Tuesday night. You've been incredibly loyal to me through the election, and I really appreciate it. But you know, this is the front line of the fight. No happy talk, no BS. I'll tell you the data when it's good, bad or indifferent. Well, I told you last night that Albo's position when it comes to wages, that wages should go up if inflation goes up, will only increase inflation, and increased inflation increases interest rates. Would you bet your house on Albo? Would you bet your house on the economic calculations of this bloke?
Do you know the official cash rate off the top of your head?
Oh, look, we can do the old Q&A stuff over 50 different over 50 different figures. There'll be multiple interest rate increases, regardless of who's in government.
But do you know what?
Regardless of who's in government. Okay. We can do the 20 question stuff through all of it if you want.
Of course, he doesn't know, which is why the Prime Minister smashed him and smashed him hard. He will again in the debate tonight. You'll see it here at 11 o'clock, so make sure that you watch it live or tape it, 11 o'clock here on Sky News.
What we saw from Anthony Albanese yesterday was reckless, was incredibly reckless. And Mr Albanese showed yesterday that he is a complete loose unit on this stuff. He just runs off. He just runs off at the mouth. I mean, it's like he just unzips his head and he just lets everything fall on the table.
I love when he talks like that. Business groups too, well, they see this for what it is, something that supercharges inflation, which speeds up interest rate rises. Would you bet your house on Albo?
Oh, look, I think certainly it wouldn't be responsible. One of the things that we have seen, it's not just the cost of living that's going up at the moment, it's the cost of doing business as well.
Well, anything of that amount would be incredibly economically destructive.
Now, remember, despite the fact that many people in the Labor Party want to say he didn't put a figure on how much wages should go up by, here is the full exchange, no edits. This is what happened yesterday.
Mr Albanese, just back to wages. You said you don't want people to go backwards. Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's like the yes-no question about temporary protection visas, about boat turnbacks. He can't answer yes-no questions because Labor people say he didn't say that at all.
Kieran, first of all, that is a misstatement of what was said today. What Anthony made clear is that people's wages should keep pace so that they can pay for the rising costs of living.
No, he was given a number and said absolutely. Now, remember, if KK's job is not to stuff up the borders of this country, the expectations are she could end up in a senior economic portfolio. Again, these people are trying to lie to your face that they didn't say what you heard them say. And again, I don't care what poll comes out. I believe Australian people can see it, and they can see the huge consequences for picking the wrong side in just 10 days' time. But when asked about it again, well, he was missing when it came to the numbers, but he absolutely stood by his absolute comment yesterday.
The question was, it went to, you don't want people to go backwards. Does that mean you would support a wage hike of 5% just to keep up with inflation? My answer was absolutely, and I stand by it.
So KK was lying when she said that Albo was lying. Do you trust these people with your house? Because that's the consequence of the election. That's why what you do with your preferences matter. If you do what you did in 2019, there is a chance to stop this bloke. If you do what you did in 2016, Albo becomes Prime Minister. Christina Keneally could end up either in charge of the borders or buggering up the budget. But amazingly today, he said that he wouldn't actually take what he said was absolutely yesterday to the Fair Work Commission. You see, whenever the Fair Work Commission sets wage rises, and normally for minimum wage earners, and I don't have a problem with a wage rise for minimum wage earners, but the government can either speak against the rise or it can speak in advocacy of the rise, and then somebody at the Fair Work Commission says, all right, I'll meet you somewhere in the middle. But he's saying that he won't even take his absolutely to the Fair Work Commission. Now, again, these might sound like very complicated matters, but they're not. This is a bloke who thinks that Australia's wage policy should be directly linked to our inflation policy. Put simply, when things go up, so should your wages. But that means inflation, which means your wages, which means more, which means more, which means higher interest rates. This is what bad countries do, not countries that were able to get through a pandemic like we did. Now, I know that it was a bumpy ride, but let's be fair dinkum. More people have a job today than ever in the history of Australia. More people have a job today than before the pandemic. There is more household savings than there was before the pandemic. There are more people who decided to fix their interest rate because they had the money to do so than before the pandemic. But what it really also shows is about who is going to be in charge of the Aussie Joe Biden. A bloke who's going to, his primary function is to win the election by pretending he's not woke, but you know who comes with him. Well, it was the unions who started all of this off a couple of days ago. Unions that he was willing to march with in Brisbane. Do you think he'll stand up to them? Do you think he'll stand up to the premiers who want him to go 50-50 on everything from hospital funding to any other problems they have with their state budget? And if Labor gets in control of everything, guess what they could do? They could all have a meeting one day and decide to increase the GST. Why? Because the money goes to the states. There are consequences. There are checks and balances in our system. There is a difference between state and federal government. And there is a difference between an easy political line, which is everyone gets a pay rise, and the process of how that works, and the consequences of what happens with that. So I know that as soon as you start to argue the grey in politics, you are losing. The black and white seems so shiny, but it's going to stink, and it's going to increase your interest rates because inflation goes through the roof.